I'm going to quickly just say I'm Stephen Gyllenhaal. I'm the director of the Identity Development Institute, and I've come to this work passionately now through a film in Utero, which is what you'd seen, and also having been a father and now a grandfather and also a child and a baby and all those things, I think qualify me to be very, very concerned, passionate, and I think increasingly informed about how critical this is. So I had said to Raylene that, what we were going to do, I'll just say, how did you get involved with this? And she can then say whatever she wants to say. I decided against that upon thinking, because as they say, God and the devil is in the details. So I'm going to just read you very quickly her short bio. After raising 3 children as a stay-at-home mother, Raylene received a master's degree in developmental psychology, became a NIDCAP certified as an infant developmental specialist, and then attended medical school at the University of California, Davis. She completed her pediatric residency and neonatology fellowship, is that right? Attending neonatologist in the level 4 NICU at the same hospital, as well as pediatric department chair and medical director of neonatal services at the Loma Linda University Medical Center, Marietta. Dr. Phillips is an international board-certified lactation consultant, a fellow of the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, and a past president of the National Perinatal Association. She is currently president of the Association for the Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health. Her passion is to honor and nurture the earliest connections between babies and their parents. So now we'll go back to my original question. How have you ended up here tonight and in APPAH?
Well, Stephen, I think that this is a long and convoluted story. I'll try to give you the cliff notes. As most of us who have come to APPAH have reflected upon, it's usually some event in our life that puzzles us, some disconnection or some trauma that happened to us that we have tried to seek answers for. And for me, I've always had a love for babies. And my first career of choice, as you read in my bio, was to be a stay-at-home mother. That's all I really wanted. My mother wanted me to be a doctor because my father was a doctor. She wanted me to be a doctor, but I wanted to be a mother. That was my primary goal. I always loved babies, and that's what I wanted to do. So that's what I was. The trouble is my babies turned into children. So I took foster babies in that were waiting for adoption, and some from Child Protective Services. So I had a lot of babies in my life. But the thing that always puzzled me was my first baby was taken away from me right after birth and not returned for 24 hours. Now, what puzzled me at the time, or later when I reflected on that, is why didn't that bother me? I just figured that was standard protocol. I didn't question it. He was brought back to me. By some miracle, he breastfed fine, but I didn't realize there was a disconnect until my second and third babies were born. And I realized, oh my God, I love him just as much as my other 2, but I do not have the same connection with him. And it really puzzled me. It really puzzled me. And he also had some characteristics that you would expect to see in a baby who didn't have that initial emotional connection with their mother. And that was challenging for all of us. And when I say I puzzled over it, the truth is I agonized over it. And there are many on this call and many that I've encountered who understand completely what I'm talking about. There was something there that really bothered me. And when I stumbled upon APPAH as an organization, I really still don't know how I found APPAH. There was an email in my inbox from Wendy McCarty, who was speaking about or advertising some of her articles and writings. And I read one of them and I immediately bought them all. They were on a sale. I bought them all. And I also immediately joined APPAH. I hopped on a plane and went to the first regional conference I could find, which happened to be in Minnesota. I was in Southern California. This was after I had got a master's degree in developmental psychology, focusing on mother-infant attachment. And that became my passion. I knew there was something about attachment that I needed to know. And so I studied that as my master's project. I trained to be a preterm infant developmental specialist. NIDCAPS, the acronyms that you read off, stands for Newborn Individualized Developmental Care and Assessment Program. And it was a new way of caring for premature babies in the neonatal intensive care unit that focused on recognizing them as human beings, as little human beings who could communicate with us with their body language and with their physiology. And that when we noticed and recognized these behavioral cues, and when we respected them and modified our care, not what we did, but how we did it, then their outcomes improved dramatically. And this was very much in sync with the way I had always cared for babies, and always knew intuitively that there was something more to babies' brains than we had been taught, that I had been taught as a developmental specialist. I had been taught that babies were born with blank slates for brains, and that there was a big debate of nature versus nurture. But I knew, after looking in the eyes of so many babies, that there was somebody in there that, and I used to say, someday we will discover that babies are far more intelligent than we ever thought. But I didn't know anybody else thought that way until I met APPPAH. And then I found a whole community of people who have been thinking this for years.
And I want to come back to something that's very difficult to talk about, but I think we need to sort of address it to some degree, which is, you talk about this communication between the baby and the mother, that the baby is, that one can communicate with the baby, and the baby is. Can you explore that a little bit more from the perspective of that very early period of time? From fairly early on in utero through birth and early perinatal life.
They also found that for every 100 words that were spoken directly to the baby by the mother or the father, there was a significant increase in the language scores of babies at 18 months corrected gestational age, as done by the Bailey scores. So, and they found that the increase in language scores was correlated to the words spoken directly to the baby by the parent, but not to the words heard outside the NICU, the incubator. So there was a significant difference. The baby could distinguish, and you could see the difference in outcomes by the mother's voice speaking to the baby, or the father's voice, or the partner's voice, a consistent voice that they knew. And the effect was much more pronounced if it was the mother than it was in just like the nurse talking to the parent outside the incubator. So I have seen babies respond. I have seen so many times I can't even count. You put a fetus, a premature baby, a very premature baby, on their mother's chest, who is requiring a significant amount of oxygen. And you have to turn the oxygen levels down because the babies become so physiologically stable that often they go all the way to room air. I mean, there's some babies who are very sick and they don't respond exactly that same way, but almost always they are more stable with their mother. So there's a physiologic and some level of communication that I'm seeing on my monitors in the NICU that's going on.
It's also just common sense.
It is common sense. And I love how Thomas Verney puts it in the movie, in Utero, where he says there's 3 ways that mothers communicate with their babies. One is verbally, by talking to them. And the second is by playing with them or touching them or patting them, that sort of thing. And well, actually one is hormonally with their hormones, their hormones, cortisol with anxiety, their, just the joy hormones, their fear hormones, all their hormones, they're communicating with the baby. And I think there's also the playing with them, the talking with them, the patting to them. But then there's this other element that's more elusive that we can't really measure, and that's psychically. And he even said, I don't know how to explain it, but it's there. It's there. And we do have ways of knowing that babies remember things that their mothers thought or that their mother said. We have many examples of that.
Why is there so much resistance to this?
Some of it is just the general resistance that some people have to any change in their thought processes or their daily lives. I don't understand that because I don't feel that. That's not my experience, but I know it's real. There could be some fear involved in this unknown concept, but I think it's so exciting.
Yeah.
The idea that we can communicate with babies.
Is it that people are just in some ways grieving themselves that they didn't have this? Or is it scary that babies are so sentient?
I think that there's always the issue of guilt, you know. People worry about if the mother has this much ability to impact the baby, and this is something that's a little scary. It's a lot of power, right? Yeah. And we emphasize the trauma, and that's one of the things that the movie In Utero does, is emphasize the ability of babies to receive transgenerational trauma, and not just from the mother, but from the mother's mother and the mother's story and that sort of thing. That's kind of scary to know that that's so possible. But we forget the other side, which is the ability to pass joy and love and connection. I think that's one thing that needs to be emphasized just as strongly as the potential for passing trauma. It's really important that we know that trauma can be transmitted, because then we can recognize it for what it is. And then we can apply healing techniques. But we have to know the other side. I do want to say one thing, Stephen, is the same thing has happened in the NICU with neuroprotective family-centered developmental care, that in the 80s, we started to see how the way we were treating premature babies and sick babies in the NICU was traumatizing to them in far bigger ways than just medically. And for years, we went to conferences where we learned about all the ways we were traumatizing babies. But we've started to switch now and find ways that we can avoid traumatizing babies, and where we can support the connection with the parents. That is really the antidote to this trauma and the healing aspect of it. I think the same thing is true for the world of babies who are not born prematurely. They're in the womb. We have this, it's important that we established that they are vulnerable to trauma. But now that we've established that, we really need to shift our focus to how can we prevent this and heal it.
Yeah, and it does seem, one of the things we'll kind of get to it more later on, but the film that we're developing together now, The Bond, it's the correct thing to move from trauma to bonding. That's where the solution sits, and it's really pretty simple. It's human bonding with another human being.
I'm seeing parallels between environmental crisis and activism and what we're doing here. And I've been studying with Craig Chalquist out of California. He uses the word enchantivism, and I think that's the way we did it. So you did it sort of with your fairy tales. If we can get to that, that would be re-enchanting the embryological, the movements of birth. That would be the way to go, I think.
It's interesting that you use it's enchantment, basically, you're talking about, right?
He calls it enchantivism. He's saying tell the deep story. Tell it using fairy tale and myth.
Well, I think we are enchanting beings. I mean, we are in a universe. I mean, when you kind of take a minute, and being older, I've had some minutes to think about this, and have grandchildren and watch the miracle of all of this. We are enchanting. We live on a planet in a universe. It's infinite. We barely know what's going on. And it's so clear that it's all about love. It's just, that's the core. I mean, then you can get into quantum mechanics and all that, which I swear I will not do right now. But I think I like that idea of enchantment being human, not outside of human, being a human. It's within human. What do you think, Raylene? What are your thoughts on?
No, I think that there's really something to that. And I think about the baby in utero has been invisible for so long And I know that we've always talked about bonding and attachment starting at birth. I mean, that's been historically the way we've when we even began to think about bonding and attachment, we always just thought it started at birth. But the idea that it can start before is so magical and so amazing. So yeah, I think that's fits right in there.
And this, I don't want to jump way ahead of ourselves here, but this is what's so interesting. Thomas Verney's third form of communication, this psychic term, and I'm always nervous about the word psychic, but this idea that the mother can be thinking something and the baby picks that up, which there's so much evidence of. It's just all over the place, and no one wants to. I guess people are frightened about it. Maybe one of the reasons why is because so the Institute has uncovered, not the Institute, but actually Bert Hellinger with Family Constellations. He learned it from, by the way, indigenous peoples in South Africa. The Zulus began to see how they used something, common sense of sensing things about other people, which we call resonating, is a relative of what we see going on in utero. And I think maybe people are frightened by the fact that we really pick up nuanced, specific details about everyone around us. I mean, I guess that's sort of scary. I mean, someone can walk in the room and they're kind of knowing all about you without you saying anything. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But I want to kind of explore that and also other questions. What do you think, Raylene? What's your...
Well, I think that we're all born with some level of that capacity, like any other quality, musical talent, artistic talent. We all have some level of it, but can always be honed. And some people are born geniuses in a particular field. Some are more able to have that perception. Some are more empathic. Some are downright psychic. Some are musical geniuses and, artistic geniuses. So, but we can all increase our capacity in each of these things if we're open to it, and if we want to.
I think,
I know that there was
another question. Yeah.
I just wanted to share my experience, what happened yesterday with the movie. So I first time watched the movie years ago when it came out, and all that I had retained was this amazing idea about how phenomenal babies are, how much they learn, and all of this beautiful messaging. So what happened Saturday, I teach parents with infants, and this particular group was a baby massage group. Yes, and so after recommending the movie, I watched it again. And I stopped midway to the movie and I sent them an email, like a huge disclaimer, because it created so much anxiety in me.
I totally understand. I think we knew this was the truth. We did, you make a film, you do the best you can with it. One of the things we found with it, it's been very, very effective for adults dealing with their childhood trauma. Much more effective there than with mothers who are pregnant or have young babies. We are making a new movie called The Bond to address exactly these things. And it may go back and rework in utero at some point. But I totally get what you're saying.
And Stephen, I want to respond to that. Yeah. One thing I think we need to be sure to include in The Bond is that and to people who watch the movie in utero and have this response is that babies are amazingly resilient if we explain to them the reasons for things, or we explain to them, acknowledge the trauma that they have been exposed to or that we have been exposed to and are responding to. I think that tool to be able to explain things to babies is something I have to use all the time in the NICU. I mean, I'm never called to a delivery unless there's something wrong. So when I'm dealing with a baby in that setting, I have to tell them what's going on. And I have to explain to them why they have a mask over their face and they're separated from their mother. And I find that they relax and they respond much better if I'm able to explain it to them. So I think this is a tool we need to offer to people who are worried about current ongoing trauma their babies are experiencing or exposed to, I should say.
Yes, I just thought I'd drop in as a facilitator for this program, Prenatal Bonding, for 11 years now, that the miracles that I have seen with the families that I have worked with that started out loaded with fear. They had trauma backgrounds. They were able to gradually connect with the baby. And that included siblings, because I always encourage siblings to be part of the whole program. And their end results, even with a mother that has challenges, it helps to settle her so she's getting more of the oxytocin instead of the stress hormones. This program does help change the whole hormonal system in the mother, and the outcomes are fantastic. Less than 2% postpartum depression, amongst a million other things. So thank you.
Over the past year and a half, I've been working with couples expecting their first baby. And really what I've noticed is the absolute importance of how we ourselves come into contact with the mother baby and the family system, and how it really is a process of bringing attention to what is arising in the field and gently inviting that. So I think it's not necessarily of dropping a bomb of, oh my God, stress is doing harm to your baby. There are ways that we can approach that is gentle and also informative and experiential. And I feel that the work that I'm really feel very blessed to be learning through and learning from the families that I work with is that how that is also changing my nervous system response and my own capacity to co-regulate and resource as a practitioner, as the one who is actually entering the field for labor, for birth, for the welcoming of the baby, and just the importance of that continuity and relationship.
I just wanted to say that is so important. Checking our own energy, working on our own wounds so that we have healing helps us to not only respond to situations that could potentially be traumatic or are traumatic in ways that are healing, but it also helps us share information in a much more healing way. So I really appreciate that observation.
I think the thing I want to keep in the forefront about In Utero is it was our first step into this world. It's actually one of the first films that has really addressed these core issues. And like any science, there are issues that are incorrect in it, even just in tone. And one of the reasons to bring the film out is to allow that dialogue to take place and then learn from it and move forward. My own journey has been, I learned that this film did not do what I wanted to do personally. It didn't solve those problems. It did solve some problems. We did prenatal bonding for my son, and it was very important and very, very helpful because it really drew our attention to this unborn baby. I think there's no question that communication, that profound bonding had an impact. But I think that the film made me try and figure out, and I got some help with, okay, how do we help ourselves first with our own trauma, with our own issues? We've got to deal with that. But then equally important, how do we clear out the things that are getting in the way for us as parents? Being a parent, that's what I'm addressing. And as practitioners, how do we clear ourselves up? And I just want to do a little pitch for the Institute, which is where we are training people to clear these things out so they're not traumatizing people anymore, so that they are, the way you were saying, you're co-regulating, you're getting better at this, you're there. And I think the baby picks these. I know the baby picks this up, maybe more effectively than the conscious, educated parent.
I think there's no doubt about that. I think that whatever we bring to birth, before birth and after birth, whether we're talking with the baby inside the mom or after birth, as I usually do, checking our own energy and our own triggers, and making sure that we have done what we can to resolve those, it makes a huge difference in how babies respond. I mean, even as adults, when we walk into a room and there's tension in the air, we feel it. So imagine a little baby being who's closer to spirit than we are can really, really respond to that sort of thing.
Well, I think in some ways less traumatized as time goes on, and you get traumatized again and again. You know all the work around it. You know, you fragment more, you bury more, you have less access to your sensitivity because you've got to survive. So yeah, early on it's particularly intense and sensitive, I think.
I was really interested in what you said about the effectiveness of the film for adults who maybe hadn't been aware that trauma, that they had early trauma. I would have to agree really strongly with that. That I think that's the audience that is most benefits from this film. It's really not meant for pregnant mothers or early postpartum parents they're in a very vulnerable state, and it's after the fact. But it's so effective for adults who thought, "Oh my God, now I get it." Yeah. But I think that this is why I'm so glad we're making the film The Bond, because that is going to be specifically for families who are wanting to conceive, families who are already pregnant or have just given birth. Very, very excited about that. We will be able to take all that we have learned from In Utero and all that we wanted to say or that we felt wasn't said, and say that in the movie The Bond.
When In Utero first came out, I found that it was very, very good for the fathers because they got it a lot more, and they weren't full of fear. The woman in my work as a midwife, the woman was, many times she was traumatized and afraid, you know, and the father, he got it. He really understood it, and he understood. Then it became easier for me to teach him and teach them how they could work together to befriend their baby.
So I have screened, had many screenings for In Utero, and I absolutely love the fact that we've got something that is so honest.
Yes.
Because I think that we just tiptoe around some of these things, you know, as health professionals, we know this stuff. And I have screened many other documentaries, but this In Utero is really profound, and we've needed this. But I have found that I've actually got a lot of therapy patients out of this, because I think it's really important that you are there when you are screening it, that you do a big introduction about it, and that you're there to pick up some of the pieces afterwards.
Right.
And it has been, I still show it a lot. And I think it's wonderful. I'm very much looking forward to The Bond, but I work a lot with debriefing and healing women, adults who are traumatized from birth.
The problem is that we also find ourselves addressing is transgenerational trauma. So that when something profoundly traumatic has happened 2 generations ago, and people don't want to be honest about it and bury it the way families do, they just have to go on with life. Wars, any number of things that have not been processed. And, you know, Gabor Mate talks about that. You know, if it doesn't get processed in one generation, it's just going to continue. And so we're caught, both fathers and particularly mothers, on a biological, psychological, spiritual, if you want to, however you want to look at that, level of wounds that continue forward. And I think the work that we've been doing more and more, really based on neurobiology, I mean, more and more based on really the hard sciences that are coming out, is clearing that material up. So one of the things that someone was asking me today, should a pregnant woman do our training? And I was saying yes, because you can, because there's the training, there is like a bunch of people, it's a community, you come at this work gently, but you do start to clear up the stuff inside of you. I also think the practitioners, I mean, should be doing this work, as we were saying earlier, because there's all these deep things going on that are really, the baby is picking them up.
Yeah.
And they also pick up when it's cleared up.
Susan, I want to respond. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness in which you use this this tool of in utero by providing a warning, but I should say a disclaimer at the end, letting people know what they're getting into so that they can be prepared, and then showing that what you've described is a very honest look at the reality of trauma in utero, and then being there, like you said, to pick up the pieces, but to provide resources for people. I think that is really a holistic type of approach to this show, this movie, this wonderful tool that we have. But I think it's important that these components all be included. It's not fair to just throw truth at people and have it thrown in their face without being prepared or having resources to deal with this. And the Identity Development Institute is one of those resources. There are many others. It's not the only one, but it's a particularly effective one.
One of the positives of the pandemic has been we have gone completely online and have found that work completely works online, which means it's available to anyone, anywhere, in the outback of Australia, in the middle of London, in Hollywood, LA, it's available now.
Yeah.
And I think we want to be building this community of like-minded people now as quickly as we can. And we have this new tool, we have this tool of the internet, which I think is really critical.
I think, Stephen, that one of the really great things with this film, and I love the term I love the observation from Susan that it's very honest film, is that it highlights that we have made efforts to make birth safer, and we've tried to make the mother in pregnancy more medically. We've taken care of the mother's nutritional and medical well-being, but we haven't focused on her emotional well-being. And this movie, In Utero, has highlighted that it matters. And you've shared so much science that the emotional well-being of the mother really matters. And even since 2016, so much more science has emphasized that the state of the mother's mental and emotional well-being matters. We cannot change birth outcomes if we don't start changing how pregnant women are treated. Really supporting their emotional and mental well-being.
And I think one of the things we want to come to later on is how does everyone here, how do we help each other? How do we continue to create a community? APPAH how do we expand APPAH into what we're doing? How do we expand this even wider? How do we really get this out into the world even more? Because it's critical.
I want to address the issue of guilt, just that one thing. My own children were born in particular circumstances, which I won't go into. But when I came across Dr. Verney's book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, that was an absolute revelation to me. I'd already studied psychology and had trained as a therapist and loved attachment theory and so on. But it explained so much about what had happened with my own mother and her history. So I got really excited. I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. Why don't people know about this? That there is this life in the womb beforehand. And then I started to look at my own children and my relationship with them. And I started to feel a lot of guilt. But eventually, I've had to move past that, because I had to say to myself, I didn't know. And this is what we are all facing. We didn't know. We didn't have that information. We weren't taught. We're not shown this in school. So I feel I certainly have taught myself to forgive myself, and it still goes on. But we need to forgive ourselves for not knowing. And because we probably most of us feel a great compassion for women, for parents, for babies, for life itself, that we want this wonderful work of understanding what goes on to continue. So this is my Please.
The two things I want to add. One is next month, Thomas Verney is going to be our next webinar guest. So you just so that everyone knows that, and he has a new book out as well. And secondly, someone once said, guilt and forgiveness are kind of meaningless because we didn't do anything wrong because we didn't know any better. And it applies to ourselves and it applies to the generations before us. It's the great thing about science is, okay, let's fix it.
I like the way Maya Angelou says it. Something about, we do the best we can with what we know, and when we learn better, we do better.
Yeah.
So simple and so succinct.
I started doing my own work in about 1978 on my pre and perinatal issues. And I don't have any degrees in psychology or anything. I'm just a minister. But when people come to me with problems with their kids, the first question I ask them is, well, tell me what was going on when you were pregnant with them, if they indeed are their biological children. And I just want to share this. The child was 20 years old, was into drugs, kept trying to kill herself. And her mother, I knew pretty well, and she was a very spiritual person. And I asked her, and she told me of a very traumatic event that she had just gone into major rage. And this obviously had affected the daughter that kept trying to, out herself. And after the mother dealt with her own guilt, finding out that what she experienced affected her child in the womb that was now this young adult, she explained to her daughter and she apologized to her, and it had a major healing effect on that daughter.
This can be untangled if you work in the realm underneath the intellectual. If you work in the realm that baby is connected to from the very start, those deepest areas, it can be processed. Not perfect, not easy. Maybe it'll get better. It will get better, but it's doable. The truth sets you free.
Raylene said that, these babies recover very quickly. And when you talk to them and you explain to them what's going on, they are not as traumatized. They're more engaged in understanding that they're a part of something that's happening as opposed to being the result of something that's happening. And I think that's very true when we bring in guilt and shame, that we're a part of something that's happening. But, the notion of what you're making with the bond, I really want to encourage you to not be afraid of love. Because love is really not the antidote. Love is the communication that prevents this trauma from happening. And I think
heals it.
Well, it does both. It does both. And I think our society has gotten extremely confused about love. And the same way, I think, why do people not talk about trauma? I think they also don't talk about love because they themselves are so traumatized. They don't know what love actually feels like in a way that can be soft and gentle and embracing and including. So I really encourage you in the bond to boldly move into that territory because it is so hard for so many people.
I want to just take a second with that, and this is also just thoughts that are forming around quantum mechanics, and that it's all energy underneath it all. And I do wonder, is everything held together by love, actually? We define love in a certain way. It almost goes back to medieval times, but I think love is also very powerful. It's not just gentle, it's very, very powerful. So yes. It's the blocking of love that seems to be the core traumatizing definition. It's when you block love, you cause trauma. When love is allowed to flow through, when the energy is allowed to flow through, which I think is the definition really of love, then a person can handle anything.
I think that's true. And what I mean by the gentle is, when we think of love as powerful, that large, incredible feeling, that's something people can relate to because it's big and it's got drama and it's dynamic. And so you can make a story out of it and you can make sense out of it. But when that baby, from the very beginning, like what Raylene is talking about with that little fetus on the chest, that is the stabilizing vibration. Love at that moment is a stabilizing vibration. And I think if we expand that and give ourselves a chance to realize that this all pervasive caring kindness is stabilizing to us. That would be a very interesting interpretation for people.
Raylene, what do you feel about love? How would you come at that?
Well, I was interested in, and I actually wrote it down about something that was said in the movie because it struck me. It says love. It was talking about how too many children are born feeling unloved, and that until that changes, the world will not change. This is a quote from the movie. Love is not just an emotion. Love is also a set of actions. When a baby is understood, the baby is loved. Being understood is being loved. So I think that I mean, we can intellectualize that, you know, the baby is understood, the baby feels loved, but it's that drawing together. To me, it just comes down to one word: connection. You know, it's that connection, that drawing together. Even if you don't completely understand, seeking to understand, seeking to have that closeness. That's really all we as human beings want, I think. I think we all crave. And when we don't get that, that's where the wounding happens.
Hi, my question is, how is this being like taught to medical professionals, and or it needs to be taught, I think, like in medical school, but I feel like there's a lack of just knowledge in just medical professionals, and in a lot, I know it's not just medical trauma, but that's where it shows up a lot for premature babies. I can tell you that's where it has shown up for me, as being born prematurely.
We have now entered an era in medicine where the mind-body connection is not even questioned anymore. You know, it did used to be. I mean, it was a new thing a few decades ago. We're now seeing an increased awareness in trauma-informed care. So that's something that people know is out there. They may not understand it. They may not know exactly how to do it, but they know it's a thing. And it's not a foreign concept. That trauma-informed care, you see conferences and all kinds of blogs about it in the medical profession. What I think is missing that we need to bring into is this active prevention of trauma, this creation of a modalities of nurturing, providing care with conscious nurturing of pregnant mothers during the birth process, the handling of the baby in any scenario, anytime anybody lays hands on a baby or a mother, consciously thinking of, am I doing this in the most nurturing way possible? Because I can tell you that is not happening. What's happening is I'm doing it in the most efficient and legally and medically safe way. But am I doing it in the most nurturing way? That is not the conscious intent of most medical professionals. And I'm beginning to think that that may be the language or the vehicle in which some of these concepts can be embedded in, is the concept of who can argue with the fact that we need nurture, and who can argue with the fact that doing something in a nurturing way would have better outcomes. Anyway, I'm exploring that idea and that thought, but I'm very sensitive to your question, Amber, and it's on all of our minds. We know that while APPAPPAH has historically done a good job of speaking to professionals outside the hospital, you know, doulas and midwives and people who work outside the hospital, we've not made a dent in the medical world. And that's where most babies are born and most pregnant women are cared for. So if we're going to make a change that has a global impact, we have to tap into this audience. And that's my big challenge.
I think it's, Raylene, I think it's one of the reasons you and I have gotten together. So Raylene, as her bio shows you, is a medical expert in this area. Where I think I come in as being valuable is as a media person. The Institute is one of the major aspects of the mission is education, using movies, using social media. We have an amazing tool. We have amazing tools now that can be, you know, can go global in a way they never could before. Also, I do think the pandemic has been very, very helpful in making people aware that we are all traumatized.
Yes.
That's part of what, and it's not just one or two of us or a few of us, it's everybody now. It doesn't matter what class you're in. The other piece of it for me, which is we're coming sort of back to In Utero, is In Utero has forced me to create this institute. So the challenge is we have to start protecting these babies. It's not an impossible thing to do. It's pretty simple. The problem with that is you also have to have the grown-ups cleaned up a little bit, not totally, but cleaned up a little bit. You know, it's like, so it's just one of the commitments of the institute, and I become inarticulate about this. Very simple method. That's what Franz Rupert. That's what I emerged with. I did this work better than any work I'd ever done. I'd been in therapy for 50 years. Very simple method. It can be taught. It cleans up this stuff. Because we have this double problem. Oh, there are these babies over here, but we got to get these nurses and these people in the hospital to do a little bit of work, and we got to get the parents to have done a little bit of work too. And I think there are a number of programs that APPAHAH has that you've been talking about. Ours is a little more intense. It's 18 months of work, although you can do half of that and get a lot of things done. We're trying to put together programs that solve this stuff, you know, relatively quickly. It can be done now, but it's media for me is a big piece of this too. So
yeah.
And I would just do a pitch to everyone here, whoever is, we want to have you participate with us through APPAHAH, through the Institute. You know, you've got this great organization, and we're here to Hollywoodize it a little bit. You know, what this is about. Yeah.
Well, you bring a tool, Stephen, that reaches the heart.
Yeah.
You know, it's more than just book knowledge and head knowledge. Film and other forms of art reach the heart, and this work can't be done just in the head. It has to be done in the heart. So I think that's one of the most valuable things that you bring.
So I'm in the population of people who watch the film for the first time as someone who is currently pregnant. Also, I am a researcher. I'm a transracial Korean adopted person in reunion with my family since 2004. I was adopted in 1983. And I also do research. I'm a professor, and I look at adoption studies in relation to somatic trauma. And so what I found really interesting about this really important film is the implications for adopted people, because one, the stressors that are on mothers, because the film does touch upon like when you don't want to necessarily keep the child. And that's something that so many mothers who end up giving children up for adoption, they're often forced to. Politically in Korea, that was much more the case than doing it of their own free will. Their parents or their partner pressured or forced them to give up a child. They didn't have a lot of information. They didn't have a lot of options. So that part of that impact. And then also we were separated from our families, from our mothers, often at birth. And the clean slate thing that's been perpetuated that's clearly so harmful beyond adoption, but that was the basis of the adoption industrial complex, that we would separate these children from their mothers immediately because they won't remember. It's less traumatic for them. And we know now through all the research that that is absolutely not true. And so many adopted people were overrepresented in mental health issues, overrepresented in suicide. And all this trauma comes from a pre-verbal, pre-conscious place. So I found it really validating. My doula actually sent me the link to watch the film and everything. So, and we're in conversation because my care is very trauma informed based on my identity and my experiences.
I work with a couple of people who were adopted on a very deep level, the level that we work on. And there's just absolutely no question that it's a profound issue. And I think, but what's holding us back from really facing this? That's why I want to come back to guilt. Guilt doesn't solve anything. It just shuts people down. We want to kind of get past that, but we got to get to the truth of it.
If we don't name it, and this is the beauty of the film, it names the issues. And adoption is one of those issues that if we don't name it, we can't address it. We can't heal from it. And we also can't change the way we do things. There's always going to be adoptions, and nowadays there's a lot of surrogacy, but we can do. I just had a nurse at my hospital who was a surrogate mother, and she was actively trying not to engage with the baby that she was carrying, because she thought that that would be harmful to the baby. But when she came to I invited her to come to our prenatal bonding birth psychology summit and learn the value of bonding prenatally, even in her circumstances. She completely changed, and she has the most beautiful bond with this baby and with the adoptive mother. And so they both bonded. I mean, you can't get too much love, right? So they both bonded with this baby. And if we don't name these kinds of things, though, we cannot learn better ways to deal with these kinds of issues.
I found my life totally changing by getting active in all this stuff, to write books, to write articles, to even make little films, to just go out in the world and express this, because there's so many people who are doing really damage, who just don't know at all. So just want to push that a little bit.
I hope, Stephen, that we can share our emails so that they can contact us. Absolutely. Mine's just president@birthpsychology.com, and maybe Derek can put that in the into the chat. But I would value any ideas or contacts with how we can get this information to universities or to medical professionals in a more efficient way. I think that the most important thing is to be aware that it's possible, and that there are modalities for identifying transgenerational trauma, and including the identity development modality, and then being willing to deal with it, and accept and do the work to heal it. If we name it, if we take advantage of a healing modality, whatever one we seem to be drawn to, that they can be healed, and we can be free from much of that.
There are a lot of modalities now that are emerging with a similar understanding that I think really starts with, Raylene, what you talked about in the very beginning, which is the resonating, the connection, that psychic connection, where the mother thinks something and the baby feels it. That there is so much evidence that ability continues as people grow up. For instance, why do we pick the wrong partner over and over and over again? Why do we pick we see this person, they look great, they behave wonderfully, and they turn out to be so similar, for instance, to our mothers, as an example, or our fathers. We are brilliant at incredible nuanced detail. We have this antenna. It's just messed up, So the fact is, there are a lot of methods, and I think one of the things that I want to do is connect the methods more and more. APPAPPAH being one organization, the whole protection of the unborn and of the baby, and of the prenatal experience, and of the mother, and of the practitioners that are doing that, to educate that whole group, to expand that group, so that the grandparents and the other people begin to pick all that up. We can begin to tie these networks together. Internal family systems is really interesting. Family Constellations has a lot of this material that's available. A lot of trauma work. Janina Fisher, there are a lot of people that are Mother Hunger, which I mentioned earlier. So many people are picking up on how enchanting we are as human beings. That we're so far more complex. I think one of the issues, though, is when you get into transgenerational problems, it's a tough thing to bring the truth to the foreground, but then you start protecting the next generation, who, as long as you're silent, you don't get to. So the transgenerational trauma is a really important piece of this, because we want to clean it up, because it can be cleaned up, but only by naming it, by really naming it. These are difficult things for people to really face and change.
There was a county in Wisconsin that had a sudden decrease in premature birth rate, and they were trying to figure out what had caused this sudden decrease because the obstetrical management of mothers and babies had not changed at all. And the surrounding counties had not experienced the same decline. And what they found was that the county had instituted a new program of support from pregnant mothers. They had home visits where they would go to find out, 1, did they have enough food to eat? 2, did they have shelter? And 3, did they feel safe? Those are the 3 things that they checked on with every pregnant mother. And they found that that was enough to decrease the premature birth rate. And I'll never forget the last line of this little blurb, this little newsworthy item was, apparently the well-being of the mother affects the well-being of the baby. What I think what you do is you shine a light on the truth. Yeah. And that's not always, it's not always sweet and lovely. It's not. So yes, I think just the fact that generational trauma exists is something that we need to recognize can be cleared up, and it gives us opportunities. Opportunities to do that work before conception, or to do it, during pregnancy. And if not, do it afterwards, or do it much later when you're grandparents.
When you work on yourself, when you really work on yourself and you do bring joy and more joy and more loving yourself, your children begin to pick it up.
Yes.
And it can't be a promise. You can't say, well, this is going to happen. But my experience is that it has definitely has an effect. From what I've seen, the best thing a parent can do with grown children is take care of themselves. I do want to talk a little bit about The Bond and the one other movie we're doing as well. And, and people can definitely get involved and help us with this process. Both you may love film, and that's an interesting part of it, or more importantly, what the films are about. The other film we're looking at is Rockabye Baby, which is about sleep training and how that's a problematic approach.
Well, I think we've talked about The Bond and the fact that this is going to be the light side of In Utero. It's all the things we wanted to say but couldn't fit in one movie, and what the potential is for bonding and connection, and sharing of love in that. Not ignoring the shadow side of trauma, but talking about how we can prevent in many cases, or mitigate or minimize trauma. I'm very excited about this film, and we'll have a chance to preview it at the Birth Psychology Summit in March. And then also when we launch it, we'll have lots of opportunities to discuss it. So that one, the Rockabye Baby one, I just know the concept is something I'm very passionate about. I speak to every parent that is discharged from both the newborn nursery and also the NICU about the importance of responding to babies and not letting them cry it out, the harm that can do.
Maybe the approach to Rockabye Baby is not about how horrible this is, although there may be a little bit about how damaging it is, but it's more about how wonderful it is to bond with the baby. I mean, maybe we go that direction. Maybe I'm learning that we go more that direction. Just lead down the path that's the positive path. How wonderful.
Well, I think that maybe start with that path, and then in the middle put in the harms of not doing it, right, and then end the sandwich approach, and then end with how you can.
Okay, good.
Totally do.
Now, anyone out there who wants to be a director, and I've been doing it my whole life, here's the way it works, just so you know. You get really smart people around you. You present an idea, they adjust it like Raylene just did. I then do it, and then I take full credit for it as the director. That's the way you survive in Hollywood.
If mothers don't have support,
yeah,
there's no way that they can do what they need to do with sanity and with clarity and with that calm love if they don't have support. Yeah. And so I think that's going to be so, if you're going to put the dark side, you really have to put society's dark side in not supporting mothers. Yes. It's the belief that mothers are the selfless caregivers, that we can handle everything, that we should be able to lift the bus to protect the child. But you can't lift the bus by yourself. You need a whole lot of people to lift the bus together.
And I think APPAPPAH is so valuable here because there is so much knowledge that you all have around this that we can distill it in these two films, and maybe some more films down the line as well, because film is incredibly powerful. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
So we're in this together. We each bring something, we each contribute, and we learn from each other. And together we will make a difference in the world.
I think that's great. And I think this is a good place to sort of rest, put it on pause for a while, because this is going to be a continuing conversation. And Raylene, thank you. This has been a delight and to be continued. And all of you, thank you very much for your contribution, for what you do, and for being with us here tonight.